Hello, good morning. Welcome to the microbiome, why the bacteria in our gut is a big deal. My name is Miranda. I'm a licensed nutritionist through Thrive Nutrition. You can find this replay at my website, which is www.thrivenutritionmn.com. And today we will be talking about all of the wonderful bacteria that are not only covering our bodies, but also covering the insides of our bodies as well. Now, this information that I will be presenting to you is fairly new. We're pretty much at the very beginning of bacterial research. And collectively, the good bacteria that covers our body is known as the microbiome. And the research into the human microbiome is still in its infancy, and there is a bunch of information that we still do not yet understand. And this will be an ongoing area of research. There are some things that we already do know from certain. Beneficial bacteria, which are also known as probiotics, have been shown to counteract inflammation and control the growth of disease-causing bacteria. They are known to produce vitamins, absorb minerals, and help our bodies eliminate toxins. Also, good bacteria help control asthma and reduce the risk of allergies. Good bacteria also benefit our mood and mental health, and they normalize our weight. It's becoming increasingly clear that destroying your gut flora with pharmaceutical drugs like antibiotics or NSAIDs, harsh environmental chemicals, and toxic foods is the primary factor in rising disease rates. Recent research suggests intestinal inflammation may play a critical role in the development of certain cancers. And until we begin to appreciate this complex relationship, we will not be able to prevent or intervene effectively in many of the diseases that are devastating people's lives today. Some general facts about the microbiome, or about bacteria in general. The idea was that microorganisms were to be divided and conquered. And that is now outdated. We not only live with them and are surrounded by them, but we also depend on them for our very existence. Your body is a complex ecosystem made up of more than 100 trillion microbes that must be properly balanced and cared for if you are to be healthy. And this is a little cartoon showing how crowded it is for the bacteria in your intestine. I've talked a lot about bacteria, but you should also know that fungi, viruses, and protozoa, as well as parasites, also live within us, and they can be found on our skin, in our mouth, nose, throat, lungs, the whole lining of the gut, the urogenital tract. All of these things are referred as the microbiome, and it varies from person to person based on factors such as their diets, their health history, where they're located in the world, and even their ancestors. This is a super fun fact that I just learned about. People exchange their microbiomes. And then there was a study done on kissing, and it showed that a 10-second kiss can transfer up to 80 million mouth bacteria. So just keep that in mind when you kiss someone again. And then when your microbiome falls out of balance, you can become sick. Those organisms perform a multitude of functions in key biological systems, from supplying critical vitamins to fighting pathogens, modulating weight, and metabolism. The gut bacteria also make up to 70% of your immune system. They talk directly to your body's natural killer T cells so that they can tell apart your friendlies from the dangerous invaders. Your microbiome also helps control your genes and how they express themselves. And so by optimizing your native flora, you are actually controlling your genes. Who would have thought you had that power? Did you know that you have a second brain located in your gut? It's true. The microbiome is closely intertwined with both of your brains. In addition to the brain you have in your head, embedded in the wall of your gut is your enteric nervous system, also known as your ENS. It works both independently of and in conjunction with the brain in your head. According to New Scientist, the ENS is part of the autonomic nervous system, the network of peripheral nerves that controls visceral functions. It is also the original nervous system, emerging in the first vertebrates over 500 million years ago and becoming more complex as vertebrates evolved, possibly even giving the rise to the brain itself. Your ENS is thought to be largely responsible for your gut instincts, responding to environmental threats and sending information to your brain that affects your well-being. Consider when you've experienced various sensations in your gut that accompany strong emotions like fear, excitement, stress, feeling the butterflies in your stomach is actually the result of blood being directed away from your gut to your muscles as part of the fight or flight response. These gut reactions happen outside of your conscious awareness because they are part of your autonomic nervous system. And I always think of autonomic as automatic, where you just don't think about it, which will include beating of your heart, breathing rates, just reflexes. Those are all autonomic responses. Your ENS contains a huge amount of neurons, 500 million neurons. And you might think, why are there so many? And that is because eating is a really dangerous activity. I don't know if you thought of that, but it is extremely dangerous to eat. Like the skin, the gut must stop potentially dangerous invaders, such as bacteria and viruses, from getting inside of the body. If a pathogen should cross the gut lining, immune cells in the gut wall secrete inflammatory substances, including histamine, which are detected by neurons in the ENS. The gut brain either then triggers diarrhea or alerts the brain in the head, which may decide to initiate vomiting or both. There's also something that's maybe not quite as extreme as vomiting or diarrhea, but you can also have little tears in your gut, which can let food substances through and also initiate inflammation throughout the rest of your body, which is often seen in autoimmune diseases. We now know that this communication between your two brains runs both ways, which is interesting. It was always thought that the brain would communicate to the gut. It was never known really until recently that the gut also tells the brain what's going on. And this communication both ways is the reason why food also affects your mood. And an example would be fatty foods make you feel good because fatty acids are detected by cell receptors in your gut lining, which then send warm and fuzzy nerve signals to your brain. Knowing this, you can begin to understand how not only your mental health is deeply influenced by the health of your gut and the microbial zoo that lives there. And so diet can rapidly alter gut bacteria. And indeed, another recent study highlights the speed at which you can alter the balance of your gut bacteria. Researchers at MIT monitored 2 people over the course of 1 year, collecting daily stool samples and correlating the gut bacteria from day to day with diet and other lifestyle factors such as sleep, mood, and exercise. One of the participants developed diarrhea during a 2-week trip to another country, and that resulted in significant changes in the balance of the gut bacteria. A case of salmonella food poisoning struck the other participant, which resulted in a drastic change in gut bacteria. The salmonella bacteria rose from 10% to nearly 30%, and the colonies of the beneficial bacteria were nearly wiped out. That's an important thing to note, is that we as humans in our gut microbiome typically have harmful bacteria in our bodies almost all of the time. And the reason you're not sick all of the time is because when you support your good bacteria, they can outcompete the bad bacteria. You have to think about your gut lining as real estate. They're always wanting to outcompete each other for survival. And so if you have a really strong, healthy bacterial microbiome, then that is going to prevent the bad bacteria from attaching, unless you get sick where you have food and you're giving yourself that that's tainted with salmonella, then you're going to expose yourself to higher amounts of salmonella, which then may cause illness. And so then once this individual recovered, the beneficial bacteria quickly rebounded to about 40% of the total microbiome, but most of the strains were different from the original strains. According to the senior author, on any given day, the amount of one species could change manyfold, but after a year, that species would still be at the same median level. To a large extent, the main factor we found that explained a lot of variance was the diet. And the most prominent changes correlated with the individual's fiber intake. Greater amounts of fiber affected about 15% of the gut bacteria, resulting in greater proliferation of them. And so then let's talk a little bit about inflammation a little bit more. And so when it comes to inflammation, your microbiome rules. Your gut is the starting point for inflammation. It's actually the gatekeeper for your inflammatory responses. According to psychoneuroimmunologist Kelly Brogan, your gut's microorganisms trigger the production of cytokines. And these cytokines are involved in regulating your immune system's response to inflammation and infection. Like hormones, cytokines are signaling molecules that aid cell-to-cell communication, telling your cells where to go and when your inflammatory response is initiated. Most of the signals between your gut and your brain travel along your vagus nerve, which is how your gut and your brain communicate. About 90% of them. Vagus in Latin is wandering, aptly named for that long nerve that travels from your skull through your chest and your abdomen, and then branching to multiple organisms, including your gut. Including your gut. Cytokine messengers produced in your gut cruise up to your brain along the vagus nerve highway. Once in your brain, the cytokines tell your microglia, the immune system, the immune cells in your brain, to perform certain functions such as producing neurochemicals. Some of these have negative effects on your mitochondria, which can impact energy production and apoptosis, and that's another fancy biology term known as cell death. And it also adversely impacts very sensitive feedback systems that control your stress hormones, including cortisol. This inflammatory response that started in your gut travels up to your brain, which then builds on it and sends signals to the rest of your body in a complex feedback loop. And so really your gut flora has a huge influence that's far from local. It significantly affects and controls the health of your entire body. Another thing that intestinal bacteria do is they induce food cravings. So if you watched my webinar on the New Year's Resolutionist Guide to Sugar Detox, we talked a little bit about how sugar can destroy healthy bacteria, but then you actually end up feeding with the sugar bad bacteria in your gut, which then will induce food cravings. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in depth right now. The bacteria in your body outnumber your cells 100 to 1, and the different bacteria have different nutritional needs. According to recent research, the nutritional preferences of your gut bacteria can influence your food cravings by releasing chemical signals through the vagus nerve, which connects your gut to your brain. And one of the study's co-authors stated that bacteria within the gut are manipulative. There is a huge diversity of interest represented in the microbiome. Some align with our own dietary goals and others not, ... Our diets have a huge impact on microbial populations in the gut. It's a whole ecosystem, and it's evolving on the time scale of minutes. Can you think about that for a second? Literally, our guts are changing every single minute, and really how much fiber and what types of food you're eating and the types of pharmaceuticals you're taking and the chemicals you're exposed to, they're constantly responding to those environmental triggers. It's already been well documented that obese individuals have different bacteria dominating their microbiome than leaner individuals. We'll talk about that a little later too. Research also suggests that as much as 20% of the substantial weight loss achieved by gastric bypass, a popular weight loss surgery, is due to shifts in the balance of the bacteria in your digestive tract. With regards to the featured research, Forbes reports microbes have the capacity to manipulate behavior and mood through altering the neural signals in the vagus nerve, changing taste receptors, producing toxins to make us feel bad, and releasing chemical rewards to make us feel good. The good news, the researchers tell us, is that we can influence changes in our gut dwellers through dietary choices. Because microbiota are easily manipulatable by prebiotics, probiotics, antibiotics, and dietary changes, altering our microbiota offers a controllable approach to otherwise uncontrollable problems of obesity and unhealthy eating. And so we know that eating is a dangerous thing for our gut bacteria. And so we already kind of knew that they're perpetually under attack. Your gut bacteria, and therefore your physical and mental health, are continuously affected by your environment and by your diet and lifestyle choices. If your microbiome is harmed and thrown out of balance, which is known as dysbiosis, all sorts of illnesses can result, both acute and chronic. Unfortunately, your fragile internal ecosystem is under nearly constant assault today. Some of the factors posing the gravest dangers to your microbiome are outlisted on the next slide. And I will briefly kind of mention each of these boxes here. Refined sugar, especially processed high fructose corn syrup, damages the microbiome. Also, the GMO foods, genetically engineered foods, which would be corn, soy, alfalfa, sugar beets, to name a few. Agricultural chemicals such as herbicides and pesticides change microbiome. Roundup, which has glyphosate, appears to be among the worst, and that's also sprayed everywhere. Roundup is owned by Monsanto. Conventionally raised meats and other animal products that are in the confined animal feeding operation animals are routinely fed low-dose antibiotics and GMO or GE livestock feed. NSAIDs are also dangerous to the microbiome. Those are the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, and they damage cell membranes and disrupt energy production by mitochondria. So maybe take a moment to reconsider whether or not you want to take an ibuprofen. One really great option for anti-inflammatory properties from herbs would be turmeric or tart cherry pills. Those also work very well for downregulating inflammation without harming your microbiome, and actually they can bolster it. Antibiotics also hurt the microbiome, and really only use if absolutely necessary. I would not suggest going to a doctor when you're sick and expecting an antibiotic every time. There's cases where doctors will also give antibiotics for viral infections because they feel pressure to provide something for their patients. Absolutely only use antibiotics if necessary. And it's really important to take probiotics while you're taking antibiotics. And a good way to do that would be to take the probiotic in between the time you're taking the antibiotic. So for example, if you have your antibiotic at, let's say, noon, and then at midnight, you would take your probiotic at 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. And then you want to take the probiotic for twice as long as you're having the antibiotic. Gluten can also influence the microbiome in a harmful way. Proton pump inhibitors also hurt it. Stress, chronic stress especially, pollution, unfiltered water, and antibacterial soap. But I think antibacterial soap was recently banned in Minnesota, and I think other states are starting to do that as well. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about obesity, cancer, depression, and other conditions linked to dysbiosis. And again, dysbiosis means a harmful change in the gut microbiome. With increasing regularity, modern science is linking more and more illnesses to dysbiosis. In that, I suspect that over time, we will find evidence that dysbiosis contributes to just about every human disease. And so the implications for your health are that vast. And here's a few examples of how those are linked. So when we look at psychiatric illness, the key to your mental health is in your gut. Probiotics, also can be called psychobiotics, or bacteria for your brain, are being used to successfully treat depression, anxiety, and other psychiatric problems. And it's important for me to note that most of the serotonin that you have in your body is also produced in your gut. Type 2 diabetes and obesity. Not only are your gut bacteria important for preventing disease, but they also play a critical role in your body weight and composition. Scientists have found a specific pattern of intestinal microbes that increase your risk for type 2 diabetes, and this pattern can serve as a biomarker for diabetes risk. Obese mice have a much higher proportion of Firmicutes bacteria, while thin mice have a much higher proportion of Bacteroidetes bacteria. Similarly, researchers have also found differences in bacterial strains between overweight and non-overweight people. A strain of beneficial bacteria called Lactobacillus rhamnosus appears helpful for weight loss in women. And one thing we'll start seeing more and more of in the future is there's going to be a lot of research funneled into learning about specific types of bacteria and using those bacteria to target and help with specific health conditions. For colorectal cancer, inflammation resulting from infection, injury, and other bodily insults changes your gut's ecosystem, which can allow cancer-causing pathogens to invade and increase your risk for colorectal cancer. Infant immune deficits. Breastfed babies receive microbes from their mother's milk, which allows early microbial colonization of their gut. This enhances the expression of genes involved in immunity. The end result is that breastfed babies show enhanced resistance to pathogens. And for asthma and sinusitis, dysbiosis in the respiratory tract may be responsible for chronic rhinosinusitis and asthma. With CRS, overgrowth of a single organism, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, is frequently the cause. And you can check out the link between how autoimmune disease is correlated to gut health in my webinar, the autoimmune and gut connection. All right, so what do you want to do then to help bolster your microbiome and make sure you have all of those good bacteria living on and within you? And like we talked already, the best way to optimize your gut flora is through your diet. A gut healthy diet is one rich in whole, unprocessed, unsweetened foods, lots of fiber, along with traditionally fermented or cultured foods. But before these powerful tools can work their magic in your body, you have to eliminate the damaging foods that get in their way. And a good place to start is by drastically reducing grains and sugar. And we didn't really talk about how grains influence gut health. Grains, especially unsprouted grains, there are certain compounds on them. There's phytates and lectins, and they can bind to the glycoproteins found in your gut lining, which then can irritate them. They can actually cause damage to the outside of your gut lining cells, which then will lead to leaky gut or inflammation. And it's really hard to digest, and the grains can bind to certain minerals which prevent your body from absorbing them. So I would strongly recommend reducing your grain intake, and if you have grains, either soak or sprout them at your house or buy them pre-sprouted. And then increasing your healthy fat intake is also really important, that people tend to forget to do when they're eating healthier. Another thing to do when you are promoting a good environment for your gut is avoiding genetically engineered ingredients and processed foods. And when you specifically look at sugar, it promotes the growth of pathogenic yeast and other fungi, not to mention fueling cancer cells. And a lot of people who, a good symptom to be aware of is if you are craving sugar like nonstop, can't get enough of it, it's usually a good indicator that you have too much yeast in your body, also known as candida. And those yeast cause those sugar cravings because that's their food source. And then also, grains containing gluten are particularly damaging to your microflora and overall health in 7 out of 10 people. So the majority of people do get damage from gluten. And then once you get rid of all of the bad stuff, you want to incorporate the good stuff, which would include consuming naturally fermented foods as one of the best ways to optimize your microbiome. That's something that we don't really do here in America. If you go to other cultures, they have traditional fermented foods that are part of their regular diet. If you look at kefir, it's from Scandinavian countries. That's a runny fermented yogurt that's way better than real, like actual yogurt you would buy in like the little tubs. And then you go to Asia and they have kimchi, which is a fermented sauerkraut. They have that with every meal. And then we have sauerkraut here in Minnesota, but that's more of like, once every couple months you might have it with a roast. So really think about how can you get fermented foods multiple times per day in your diet. And when you eat fermented foods, you are not only inoculating yourself with those good bacteria, but it also helps then heal and seal your gut, which prevents inflammation from happening and also prevents bad bacteria from attaching to your cell lining in your gut. And there's also a positive feedback loop between the foods you crave and the composition of your microbiome, which depends on these nutrients for survival. So again, just to reiterate, if you're craving sugar and refined carbohydrates, you may actually be feeding a voracious army of candida. Once you've begun eliminating foods that damage your beneficial flora, start incorporating fermented foods like sauerkraut, naturally fermented pickles, miso, kombucha, lacto-fermented foods, and fermented dairy like kefir. And then it's important to purchase these foods from the refrigerated section. That is an indicator that you are getting a living food versus in a can on the shelf that's been heated to kill all bacteria for your quote unquote protection. And these probiotic foods from the refrigerated section will help heal, repopulate, and re-educate your gut. An article in the Journal of Physiological Anthropology makes the case that properly controlled fermentation amplifies the specific nutrient and phytochemical content of foods, thereby improving brain health and both physical and mental health. The authors write, the consumption of fermented foods may be particularly relevant to the emerging research linking traditional dietary practices and positive mental health. The extent to which traditional dietary items must mitigate inflammation and oxidative stress may be controlled, at least to some degree, by microbiota. They go on to say that the microbes associated with fermented foods like lactobacillus and bifidobacteria species, which are the two most common strains of bacteria, may also influence your brain health via direct and indirect pathways, which paves the way for new scientific investigation in the area of nutritional psychiatry. And here are some of the sources from the presentation. So thank you so much for tuning in today. It was a pleasure to walk through that and discuss it. I think that, as time goes by, you're going to hear more and more information mainstream about the microbiome. And hopefully you learned through the presentation about getting in not only traditional fermented foods multiple times a day in your diet, but also even considering taking a probiotic too, since we do have a lot of environmental toxins that we may be unaware of. And again, if you want to share this presentation with a friend, family member, or if you just want to watch this presentation again yourself, you may do so by going to my website, which is www.thrivenutritionmn.com. And I will put that up immediately. Thank you so much for watching.